Hello, I am Stephen Cardenas, and this is my presentation on the philosophy of education. Now, a little bit about myself. I am a 22-year-old student at CSUF here in my final semester. I will be graduating in about a month. I have completed a bachelor's degree in cinema and television arts and a minor in history. I am currently enrolled in CSUF's teaching credential program for the 2025-2026 academic year. So I'll be starting that this fall. Looking forward to it. And I've changed my direction in life. As I've said, I previously aspired film and TV. But now I think I just want to teach history, preferably at a high school level, and eventually work my way up to teaching an AP level course. Maybe that could be US history, European history, I'm not sure yet. Ideally, I would be retired before I am 70. My philosophy, based on my results from the quiz we had taken in class, is perennialism. Now, perennialism, basically what that means is that in education, there can be said to be ideas which are the foundation of education, and they are these timeless lessons which remain relevant in any time or culture. They are tried and true strategies which should be utilized. It's a philosophy that assumes that the underlying tendencies of human nature change very little over time. Therefore, material which has been reviewed for decades remains just as important now as it was then. It still contains invaluable lessons and themes applicable to the present. For instance, if you're reading Shakespeare in an English class, then it's going to contain themes of, could be love or betrayal or corruption, that are just as relevant then as they are now, even though the world looked different then. The details of how a lesson is addressed can change as our understanding of learning improves. However, the core concepts taught should remain the same. Of course, these days we want to prioritize the engagement of students and the well-being of students, so of course strategies which help those are absolutely welcome, as long as the lessons being absorbed by them are still the same. And the role of education, or what I believe it to be, is that the purpose of education is to equip future generations with the skills needed to think critically, be productive members of society, and make choices which impact the world for the better, in addition to providing a fundamental context for how the world functions. Basically, in science, you're going to need to know basic biology and chemistry to understand how the physical world operates. In history, there's certain events, you need to have the context of how we got here as a society. And the role of a teacher is to facilitate students' acquisition of knowledge in a particular subject, in my case, history. They not only present information, but ensure that it is then effectively retained and understood at a deeper level. That deeper level part is very important. They also provide a positive example for students and support their well-being. A good teacher is not only just an information dispenser, but a role model. The role of a student is to use resources provided to them by their teachers and school to maximize their education, while also practicing cognitive, social, and disciplinary skills, which they will utilize in life to improve their chances of success. Because after all, a teacher can only do so much, a student has to choose to learn. Now, the image on the right here is two instances of what success looks like, or what people think it looks like versus what it really looks like. It's not a straight line. It's not just go to school and become successful. It's a complicated path, and you got to put in work, and you got to accommodate for certain other unique needs. What I will teach in history is I will, of course, cover all the most relevant events, figures, and concepts for my class focus, as I believe that experts in society as a whole have deemed certain details to be crucial for understanding the context of how we as a species got where we are. My goal for my students is that they will not only be caught up on everything that happened before them, like I had said, but that they will also take the lessons first learned by our ancestors before us and use them to avoid making the mistakes of the past. There's a saying that goes something along the lines of those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it. It's basically that idea. And even though society may look different now, themes of power, hardship, resistance, innovation, perseverance, or whatever really, remain just as relevant now as they were then. The images I chose on the right are some very bad men from the past and one from the present who have been using a lot of very similar tactics and ideologies to justify their power grabs and expansion of their authority. So I think, connecting all these dots is very important for students who will inherit our world to see. Whom I will be teaching. I aspire to teach at a high school level, meaning my students would be between 13 and 18 years of age, and that is a time in an adolescent's life which I believe is especially unique, as teenagers are mature enough to handle an accurate retelling of historical events, which were pivotal to our story but contain heavy subject matter. If you're teaching history to an elementary school class, for example, you're going to have to water it down a lot, and that ultimately ends up filtering out a lot of the important lessons, because you can't really tell a 7-year-old about the horrific things that, say, slaves or native tribes had to deal with, but a teenager, you can explain that to them better and they can understand it. And at this age, students usually possess a higher level of optimism for the future than the average adult. Adults are often have their spirits crushed by the modern world, but optimism is crucial for applying the lessons of history to improve the world. I believe that many adolescents struggle to learn with traditional teaching methods, in part because they do not yet see the benefit of such strategies. Many would rather learn about more relevant topics, but as my philosophy has me believe in the importance of adhering to core concepts, I will, through my teaching, connect to the present so that students can better see the relevance of historical themes. I will keep my class fun and engaging by mixing newer strategies designed to grasp the interests of students with a more concrete approach. As stated, the ideas stay the same, but the details can change. I will probably, throughout my career, adhere to a pretty more or less the same curriculum, but as my understanding of teaching changes, so will the way I implement these strategies. And this image here on the right shows the brain of the average teenager and different parts of it which develop very significantly during this time and contribute to the development of an adolescent, which makes them ideal candidates for absorbing such information. How I will teach. The subject matter I will teach will focus on key events and figures that one would expect from his high school history class, as I had stated. For instance, if I were teaching American history, I would focus on colonialism, Native peoples, the Revolution, the Constitution, westward expansion, slavery, Civil War, industrialization, civil rights, Great Depression, World Wars, Cold War, modern age, etc., etc. These are, of course, there are of course other lesser aspects which I will touch on, and I will add content on occasion which I personally feel to be useful or interesting. However, the class would mainly focus on the content everyone has come to expect. On the right here, there is a timeline of the history of the United States from about 1608 to the present, and if you look closely, you can see a lot of the more significant events that happened, which brought our country to where it is today. As boring as it sounds, I will use some traditional lecture and note strategies, and as it is timeless and proven to be effective, graphic organizers could streamline this process and help with retention. I will keep class from becoming mundane by having students complete creative projects relevant to the material, anticipatory activities to grab their attention beginning class, and I can also bring in artifacts. I have a few already, and I can bring in guest speakers as well to make history seem less distant. Students can practice critical thinking and form new perspectives through classroom discussions, such as Socratic seminars. The image next to it shows sort of how a Socratic seminar differs in structure to a traditional discussion. An entry-level assessment I can give would be just an ungraded practice test, no pressure, designed merely to provide an idea for me of what the class already knows, so I know what to focus on more for them. Formative assessment can be as simple as dropping in on students to help them with their questions or any other concerns during class time to work on a project or other assignment. For a summative assessment, I could occasionally set aside the traditional tests and essays and rather merely have a brief 5-ish minute conversation with each student about what they've learned, in addition to ensuring that they have an understanding of details relevant to the curriculum. I will be looking to see if they have developed a deeper understanding of any themes and lessons contained within the subject material which they can take with them in life. As, of course, an emphasis on the constant nature of certain concepts is part of the perennial philosophy. I want these students to not only be knowledgeable about history, but I want them to be able to use these lessons to be good people when they graduate high school. And to conclude, a perennialist approach towards education may seem plain or uninnovative. However, I believe that the reason so many teachers seem to follow it and why much curriculum is based around sets of core ideas is because it simply works. This does not mean class has to be boring. Modern methods meant to increase student engagement can absolutely be incorporated into traditional curriculums. And as a history enthusiast and prospective history teacher, I believe history is the study of humanity's accumulated knowledge. Therefore, I believe that to break away from this accumulation of knowledge in favor of alternative forms of education is to undermine the purpose of teaching history. Other philosophies can be beneficial towards the well-being of students. I'll give them that. I don't want to take away from the other philosophies. However, the core of education should be built around timeless themes and ideas, which ultimately turn students into good people.